It's one thing to eat foods that satiate you here, but it's another thing to eat foods that help you rewire your brain. Okay, one of the things that I have trouble with personally, and that I had trouble with when I was very overweight, remember I was 300 pounds before. Okay, so I clearly had issues with impulse control. I still kind of do. The only difference is now maybe I have a career doing what I do that really allows me to put the blinders on and have that impulse control. Okay, but we can eat foods that help us rewire our brain so we have better impulse control. I talked about it in another video. I call it nighttime Thomas, right? I don't let nighttime Thomas make decisions because nighttime Thomas is not a cool guy. He raids the pantry, he raids the fridge, and he doesn't know what he's doing because the brain just has no impulse control. Anyhow, let's get into these specific things that you can eat. The first one is a little bit, well, generic, but also makes a lot of sense. Eggs and beef. They satiate you here, but there's a really cool study that took a look at MRIs and understood what it did here, which was really wild. So the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition took a look, or published a paper that took a look at subjects that consumed no breakfast, consumed a moderate protein breakfast, or consumed a high protein breakfast. Okay, what they found was interesting. The high protein group ended up having much more satiation and lower levels of daily hunger throughout the course of the day, but they also ended up eating significantly less at dinner. Even when calories were somewhat matched, they just opted to eat less at dinner. Okay, well sure, we have things like gut incretins like PYY, which is gonna communicate with the brain. Yeah, okay, sure. But what was really wild, when they looked at the MRIs, they saw a decrease in pre-meal activation of the hippocampal region, the amygdala, and the midfrontal region of the brain, a decrease in activation there. Now, what does that mean? Well, pre-meal activation would mean when they're looking at a meal, okay? So you put a delicious, just bunch of food in front of me, some cakes and pies and whatever, okay? Well, normally, people are going to have a little bit of a problem abstaining from that. Okay, if you decrease activation to specific regions of the brain that are associated with, I'm gonna gobble that up right now, you're gonna have more impulse control. So what they found is that beef, eggs, protein in general, really activates these reward circuits that kind of turn down those regions in the brain. Now, you wouldn't know this unless you were looking at MRIs and looking at blood work, so this is very fascinating stuff. And it just confirms a lot of what we've been talking about. It's not just protein affecting blood glucose. It's not just protein affecting insulin. Protein is a serious reward for us. Even from a hunter-gatherer standpoint, if we were to get a kill and we were to get something, if we were to hunt something, and we got the protein from that, it would satisfy a region of our brain that says, good job, you did what you were setting out to do. It's pretty interesting, right? Some people are gonna have a heyday with this, but whatever. Anyway, the next one is very interesting because it's so simple, and it's one I've talked about before. Salt. Salt, specifically neurologically, affects what are called NST neurons. Okay, so when we don't have salt, what ends up happening is we have angiotensin, we have these other things that kind of balance out fluid regulation. But these NST neurons that are in our hindbrain actually recognize when we are low in sodium, okay? Now, as a result of that, they sort of trigger us to go find salt and seek out reward from salt because it's so vital. Salt is so important. The problem is neurons in our brain that are sort of along this whole ecosystem, sweet things can satisfy those salt cravings as well, as far as the NST neurons are concerned. So hunger, a lot of times, is really just you're looking for salt, but you end up thinking you need to eat something sweet. So one of the best ways that you can sort of reprogram your brain to not have this poor impulse control is to continually have decent levels of salt. Doesn't mean you're pounding thousands and thousands and thousands of milligrams, but you're having electrolytes after you work out. You're consuming a little bit of salt with your food. When you get hungry, maybe you sip on some electrolytes or you sip on a little bit of salt water. I put a link below for LMNT, which is the electrolyte that I use, LMNT. They have some really awesome ones. They're 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams potassium, 60 milligrams magnesium. They've been on this channel for a number of years. You know I talk about them all the time. The link down below will actually get you a free sample pack along with a purchase. So when you buy any LMNT, you get a free sample pack, a variety pack of all the different flavors. So you can keep them for yourself, or you can give them to a friend, or whatever you want to do. So what I do is when I start to get a little bit hungry, I have one of the lemon habanero or the mango chili or the citrus salt LMNT packets. I just put it in a bottle of water, put it in a glass, sip on it, and strangely enough, I'm not that hungry after that. And strangely enough, I feel like I'm satiated. So anyway, that link is down below, drinklmnt.com/Thomas to get your free variety pack with a purchase. This next one, I hope you're still with me on this one because this one is super interesting. Walnuts, but chewy nuts in particular are actually good. Okay, so this study was published in Diabetes, Obesity, and Metabolism. Very fascinating. They took a look at subjects that consumed 48 grams of walnuts for 5 days compared to an isocaloric diet, same amount of calories, but with no walnuts for 5 days. After the 5 days, they took a little break and then they did a crossover where the group that wasn't having walnuts now had walnuts and vice versa. They found some interesting things. The walnut group, even though the same amount of calories, was much more satiated. They ended up not opting for snacks throughout the course of the day. They were just making better decisions. But they also found that there was an increase in activity of the right insula to food cues. Now, in this particular case, we're talking about activation of the brain that is going to help us with impulse control. If you have to abstain from something, it's almost like you can feel the gears turning in your brain and you having to work harder and harder and harder to have that willpower. Willpower is metabolically and neurologically expensive. Okay, it's hard. You can't always willpower your way through everything. But if you're activating the right parts of the brain, you seem to be able to. There's also an increase in the dorsa anterior insula as well, which once again helped with cognitive and sort of impulse behavior, which is just so interesting. We're actually rewiring the brain. So by consuming these kinds of things, it doesn't mean that walnuts are going to fix your problems, okay? I am here to give you little bricks that you can put in the wall to kind of piece things together. If you feel like you have issues with impulse control, maybe adding 48 grams of walnuts per day for a little while could help you out. And heck, even if it's a placebo effect, maybe it's going to help you out. But then there was an additional study, this is kind of an added side, that was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, took a look at almonds. Okay, I'm not the biggest fan of almonds, but in this particular case, it's more about the mastication of it. Okay, they looked at chewing almonds 40 times compared to chewing almonds 10 or 20 times. They found that when you chewed almonds 40 times, the satiety was massively better. And there was also a literal difference in gut hormones. There was an increase in glucagon-like peptide 1, which is one of the strongest indicators we have for satiety. Okay, satiety, hunger is a very complicated science that we pretty much know very little about. But we do know that glucagon-like peptide 1, GLP-1, does play a significant role. And an increase in GLP-1 is usually associated with eating more food. But eating the same amount of almonds and just chewing them more increased GLP-1 as if they ate more. So just chew your food longer and it literally has a metabolic effect. So as always, I'll see you tomorrow.